You are listening to Germany's Secret U-Boats, 1918 to 35, written and narrated by Mark Felton. This is an audio-only program. The seeds of the massive German U-boat campaign against Allied merchant shipping during the Second World War had been laid at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June 1919. The moment Germany was brought to account for the slaughter and destruction of the First World War, and the moment the Allied nations that had defeated her divided up the spoils of war among themselves. Because the U-boat service of the Imperial Navy had been so successful during the First World War, sinking 5,000 Allied ships and taking the lives of around 15,000 people for the loss of 5,000 U-boatmen, the newly reformed German Navy, the Reichsmarine of the Weimar Republic, was expressly forbidden from designing, constructing, or operating submarines of any description. U-boats that were then under construction when the First World War came to an end in 1918 were ordered to be destroyed, and the boats that had been surrendered to the Allies on ceasing hostilities were ordered to be distributed for the purpose of study among the navies of the victorious powers, Great Britain, the United States, France, Italy, and Japan. Although these navies did subject the former imperial boats to intensive testing and study, for some inexplicable reason, the Allies failed to commandeer the documentary records and archives of the German submarine construction companies, and these were quietly taken over by the Reichsmarine. The new German Navy continued the research and development of underwater technology, thinly disguising their illegal operations under a new naval section with the deliberately misleading title of the Torpedo and Mine Inspectorate, based at Kiel. Although Germany could no longer actually physically construct submarines, her submarine designers and experts became a valuable commercial resource in their own right. The Allied nations could not stop these technical personnel, who were all private citizens, from going abroad to work. Consequently, design work was sold to Japan, and cooperative contracts were made with shipyards in Argentina, Italy, and Sweden. All of these intrigues were hidden behind a dummy firm named IVS, which was set up in The Hague in the Netherlands in 1922. The Commander-in-Chief of the Reichsmarine, Admiral Benker, provided IVS with defense funding, and this enabled the company to manufacture two modified First World War type UB-3 U-boats for Turkey. Many of the engineers employed by IVS were drawn from Krupp, the large German armaments firm. Heading the IVS board of directors was Dr. Hans Techel, formerly head of construction at Germania Werft, while the post of technical director was filled by a former U-boat skipper, Korvettenkapitän Ulrich Blum. As well as fulfilling contracts for Turkey, during 1925 negotiations were ongoing with Spain regarding the construction of several new submarines. The German negotiating team was headed by Korvettenkapitän Wilhelm Canaris, who was later to head the wartime German military intelligence organization, the Abwehr. Canaris recommended that the Reichsmarine create a liaison office under the misleading title of Ausbildung, or training, with construction contracts negotiated and administered from within the Navy, and the building work undertaken outside Germany by IVS. The Reichsmarine adopted this system, placing Admiral Spindler in charge of the new submarine office. When both completed Turkish boats were launched in 1927, IVS personnel gained practical experience testing the craft, and of course this was invaluable secret training for future U-boat operations. In 1928, the Germans became bolder in their violations of the Treaty of Versailles, quietly establishing a new cover firm in Berlin named Igevit. In the meantime, Spindler had begun to create the nucleus of a U-boat training program for German Navy crews, essential if a new generation of officers and men were to operate the secretly planned boats of a proposed reformed U-boat service. In 1927, theoretical lectures on U-boats had been introduced into the curriculum of officer cadets, the German Naval Academy at Murvik on the Baltic. Emphasis was placed on learning the tactics and equipment of the First World War and in developing ideas about where to take U-boat operations in the post-war environment. A full training program for senior officer cadets was begun at Kiel in 1929. Spindler's replacement at the secret U-boat section was Admiral Schottky, and he quickly realized that theoretical exercises were all well and good, but the students also required practical training on actual submarines. Unfortunately, the construction of elaborate simulators was vetoed on the grounds of cost by the Navy, so instead, in 1930, Schottky organized thinly disguised tourist trips made up of students, engineers, and serving and retired naval officers, and dispatched them to Finland to receive training on the 2 U-boats recently constructed for the Finnish Navy. Construction also continued on the E-1 for the Spanish Navy, but following her completion and launch in 1931, the submarine was damaged. A German testing team under Kapitänleutnant Brantegam gained extensive practical experience on the boat at Cadiz, which was the design basis for the later Type 1A U-boat. Brantegam himself had recently returned from Japan, where he had been employed by the Imperial Japanese Navy in the integration of German technology into the development of new submarines. As early as 1932, during a new program of German naval modernization, the Reichsmarine proposed to construct a fleet of 16 medium-sized U-boats, and in 1933 established the Anti-Submarine Defense School at Kiel in northern Germany, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Slevogt. Once again, the establishment's title was deliberately misleading. It was a U-boat crew training establishment in all but name. Concurrently, submarine designers and engineers continued fulfilling foreign contracts. A total of 5 U-boats had been completed by May 1933 for the Finnish Navy, and the Reichsmarine actually managed to delay the delivery of the final boat, which was in a similar configuration to the later Type 2 U-boat until 1936, thereby allowing intakes from the Anti-Submarine Defense School at Kiel some actual training time on a submarine. This was, of course, only possible with the tacit collusion of the Finnish Navy, who did not pressure Germany to deliver the final boat too excessively. By November 1934, the component frames of 12 U-boats had been constructed in the Ruhr industrial heartland of Germany. Based on designs provided by IVS, the Reichsmarine secretly transferred the frames to the warehouses of the shipyards Germania Werft and Deutsche Werke in Kiel. The boat's diesel and electric propulsion units and torpedo tubes were secretly manufactured elsewhere in Germany and followed the frames to Kiel in January 1935. Germany began construction of a new fleet of U-boats for the Reichsmarine in 1935, after Adolf Hitler had given his approval to the scheme. This followed Hitler's announcement on the 16th of March, when he had repudiated the provisions of Versailles, reintroduced conscription in the armed forces, announced the existence of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and of a program of naval rearmament. Because the Germans had already secretly been constructing all the necessary components to assemble U-boats prior to Hitler's announcement, Germania Werft was able to successfully launch the first official U-boat since 1918 on the 15th of June 1935. A Type 2A coastal submarine designated the U-1. She was placed under the command of Kapitänleutnant Klaus Ewert. The covert U-boat training establishments were dispensed with and replaced by the U-boat School Flotilla, with an attached technical training unit consisting of 6 brand new Type 2A U-boats, U-1 to U-6. At this time, the title of the Navy was altered from Reichsmarine or State Navy to Kriegsmarine or War Navy, indicating clearly the direction of German naval rearmament. Although Hitler had, following his March announcement of a rearmaments program for Germany, chosen to ignore the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, he was nonetheless keen to remain on good terms with the greatest naval power on earth, Great Britain. The Royal Navy was enormous, with a massive system of bases and fueling stations spread around the globe. But Hitler also realized that in spite of Britain's military strength, the British government had no intention of committing the country to another war with Germany over violations of a treaty many in Britain thought to have been unnecessarily restrictive. On the 18th of June 1935, the Anglo-German Naval Treaty was signed, restricting the German Navy to 35% of the strength of the Royal Navy, but permitting Germany to construct submarines for the first time. It may be noted that Germania Werft had launched U-1 on the 15th of June, during negotiations between Britain and Germany, and it was clear to the British that the Germans were going to construct submarines with or without British approval. On the 22nd of July 1935, the Kriegsmarine High Command met with the German Defense Minister, General Werner von Blomberg, to discuss their proposal to begin construction of a fleet of 48 new U-boats, with anticipated completion of the building program by October 1939. This was duly accepted, with the addition of a 49th projected boat in 1938. The production of U-boats had continued in secret prior to this agreement, allowing the Kriegsmarine to swiftly establish its first overt submarine combat unit on the 27th of September 1935. The first U-boat flotilla Weddingen at Kiel, under the command of Fregattenkapitän Karl Dönitz, a former World War I U-boat skipper. By September 1938, a year before the outbreak of the Second World War, the Kriegsmarine had been furnished with 39 new U-boats, with a further 33 then under construction. As if all this were insufficient, in the summer of 1938, German shipyards received contracts to construct a further 25 vessels. Planning was also developed for another 26, with 6 more projected in the near future, giving Germany a total late 1939 submarine fleet of 129 vessels. This equaled the tonnage of the Royal Navy's own submarine service, just one of many disturbing developments that stirred the Admiralty in Whitehall. The Kriegsmarine, by now under the command of Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, constructed submarines under the Z Plan, formally adopted on the 31st of December 1938, and which saw an incremental increase in the strength of Germany's U-boat arm as the years progressed. Accordingly, it was expected that the peacetime Navy would possess 162 U-boats by 1943, 230 by 1945, and 247 by 1948. When war came in September 1939, the U-boat service was not quite as well prepared and equipped as might have been expected. Dönitz had available 55 U-boats that were combat-ready, too few to wage a methodical war of attrition on British merchant ships, which Dönitz had already identified as the best use of his boats. The quality of the available U-boats was also not ideal, being limited to the Type 1A and Type 2A coastal boats, with a shortage of the ocean-going Types 7 and 9. It was with these limited available forces that Dönitz was able to commence a vigorous and aggressive campaign against Allied commerce, during which the British were driven close to having their supply lifelines severed. No less an authority than Winston Churchill was to comment later that the only thing which really worried him during the Second World War was the U-boat threat. In the end, the Germans would construct a total of 1,171 U-boats of all types between 1935 and 1945. You have been listening to Germany's Secret U-Boats, 1918-35, written and narrated by Dr. Mark Felton. For a wide variety of military history videos, please visit my other YouTube channel, Mark Felton Productions. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.